What is up, guys? I'm Williams, aka TheSwolefessor, here to educate you on health, fitness, and social well-being. Today, guys, we're talking about the differences between beginners, intermediate, and advanced lifters.
I am the greatest.
Someone look color. Someone look color. Someone look dance. Someone look color.
Alright, guys, so before I get into the nitty-gritty details of this video, let me start off by saying that this video is not for the purpose of anyone to go out and compare themselves to anybody else. The point of knowing if you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced level lifter has absolutely nothing to do with you going to your friends and being like, bro, I'm more advanced than you. Like, no, that's not the point of this. The point of knowing if you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced lifter is so that you can know the best way to train based off your level, and so that you can look at a program and know if it's a good fit for you or not. That's the whole purpose of that. That's the whole purpose of this video. So what we're going to do is go through a few misconceptions of what people think makes them beginner, intermediate, advanced, and explain why those aren't correct. Then I'm going to explain to you exactly what makes someone beginner, what makes someone intermediate, what makes somebody advanced, and then at the very end, just give you like some examples of how this can be useful to you. So, getting right into it. A few misconceptions is a lot of people think what makes somebody beginner, intermediate, or advanced is one, how long they've been training. This is not true. Two, how much they can lift compared to their body weight, or three, just how much they can lift, period, their absolute strength. Now, even though absolute strength is a better gauge for looking at if you should be on a certain program or not, then your relative strength compared to your body weight, it still isn't always the best factor. So, starting off with the amount of time you've been lifting though, the reason this isn't a great, way to gauge if you're beginner, intermediate, or advanced, because guys, the fact is you can be training for 5 years off and on, just BSing, never progressively overloading, never being consistent, and hardly make any gains at all. You're not gonna put a whole lot of muscle mass on that way, you're not gonna get that much stronger. So it's hard to say that, oh, I've been lifting for 5 years. Yeah, but you're pretty much at the same point that you started at. So you would still be considered a beginner. You're not advanced just because you've been in the gym for 5 years. It's kind of about what you've been doing and how you've been training. So that's why, how long you've been training doesn't necessarily go into it unless you've been training the correct way consistently for a certain amount of time. Now, as for the, you're beginner, intermediate, or advanced based off how much you lift compared to your body weight, guys, that's just horrible for the mere fact that you have to understand, body weight categories are only useful for competition purposes. That's why we have those in like powerlifting, weightlifting, wrestling, things like that. And that's only because, as I mentioned before, all factors being equal, a bigger muscle is going to be a stronger muscle, which means if you have two people who are about the same body fat percentage and have relatively the same muscle mass relative to their frame, the person who's 180 pounds is more than likely going to be stronger than the person who's 160 pounds just because he has more absolute muscle. They may have the same relative muscle mass to their body compared to their frames, same body fat percentage and lean body mass, but that 180-pound person approximately has, 20 pounds of muscle on the 160-pound dude. So he's going to be able to lift a little bit more. That's why we have things like that. But it's not a great way to look at things for what level lifter you are, because what if we're talking about someone who's 180 pounds, but they've never lifted before, or let's say that they're like 30% body fat. Obviously, that person isn't going to be as strong as someone like me who's, I'm around 160 pounds, but I have more muscle mass on me. I've been lifting for 6 years, so things like that. That's why you don't want to use that when it comes to beginner, intermediate, advanced. Plus, look at it this way. If you have somebody who's, let's say you look at it based off, you're advanced based off, how much you lift compared to your body weight. You have somebody who's 180 pounds lifting a certain amount of weight, but then they go on a cut and they get to like 170, 165. Does that suddenly mean they magically, went from being a beginner lifter to an intermediate or advanced lifter just because they lost weight even though their numbers didn't go up? So that doesn't make a lot of sense either. So what does make more sense, guys, when we look at programming is looking at your absolute strength, meaning if you're someone who's 180 pounds and then there's someone who's 150 pounds, but you guys both squat 315 for a max, you both deadlift 405 for a max, you both bench 250 for a max, then they can be on the same program because they have the same absolute strength. And that's what's something that's better to look at in terms of what type of programming that you're on, assuming that the program is something that says like, you should only be on this program if you can lift this much weight on these movements. But even with that, that's not the best way of determining if someone's beginner, intermediate, or advanced, just because let's say you have someone who's been training consistently, correctly for 3 years, but they only weigh like 120 pounds. Well, he's probably not going to lift as much as someone who weighs, 180, 200 pounds who's been lifting for the same amount of time. So you can't really base it off absolute strength either. So those are a few misconceptions I just want to knock out and explain why you don't want to use those for determining if you're beginner, intermediate, or advanced. Now, let's go through each one. A beginner lifter is someone who is completely brand new to weightlifting. Their form is pretty much crappy. They, they've been in the gym probably less than 6 months, definitely less than a year. But all in all, a beginner, the way you can recognize them is their progression. The progress is fairly linear. They can literally get stronger, guys, from session to session because the body, like the point it's at with its adaptation, is so quick. So a beginner can like literally go lift a certain amount of weight for 3 sets of 10, then come in the next time and probably instantly bump the weight up 5-10 pounds and get it again for 3 sets of 10. Their progress is very linear. They're new to weightlifting. They're going to gain a whole bunch of strength because they're getting the motor patterns down of the movements and because their body's just adapting and being forced to grow so very quickly. That's kind of a way that you can recognize a beginner lifter. On a time frame, like I said, you don't want to get into the time things. If someone kind of works out off and on, it depends. But usually someone who's been consistently lifting for anywhere from about 6 months to a year is still kind of in their beginner stage, assuming that they're lifting consistently, progressively overloading, etc. But the way you're going to recognize a beginner is going to be based off of that. Their progress is just crazy fast. It's stupid fast. Like really, they can get stronger from workout to workout depending on how they're training. Now, an intermediate lifter is pretty much where the majority of us are, and that's where we're not so much getting stronger from session to session. It can take it can take a week, a couple of weeks for us to get stronger on our movement to adapt. At this point, our form is pretty much down. We have we've put on a fairly good amount of muscle mass already, and our progress is still very steady. It's still good. It's not as fast as a beginner lifter. Like I said, it can take a week, 2 weeks to see some progress. Sometimes it can even take up to 3 months to hit a PR on something, but your progress is still steady. You're able to look over periods of weeks, 2-3 months, and see that you're progressing. You're able to see still some pretty significant growth in your muscle mass and your strength, etc. Now, and that's like I said, that's where the majority of us spend the most of our time. Most people kind of stay in their intermediate level for a good long while. Now, advanced lifters, a lot of people think they're advanced, like I said, because of those misconceptions of, oh, well, I lift this much weight. Based on me, for my body weight and my bench, I would be an advanced lifter. But guys, advanced lifters are people where they have to spend months, anywhere from 6 months to a year, to see some actual steady progress, both in their muscle mass and in their strength. Now, when I say their strength, that doesn't mean to say that they've been using the same weight for the same amount of reps for 6 months to a year, but to see significant progress, progress on their max attempts. It's going to take, that will take time, 6 months to a year. That's why I'm definitely not advanced, because I can still put pretty significant numbers on the big three, for example, without taking a full 6 months to a year. I can still see some pretty steady progress, around that 3 to 5 month type period on the big three. But it's a lot different with advanced lifters. So advanced lifters, guys, they really know their bodies. They know what works for them. They know what doesn't work for them. And it takes so much time and so much more effort and so much more volume just to get a little bit of results, that the beginners could get with hardly any effort at all. So that's how you're gonna know an advanced lifter. It takes them a very long time to put on just the tiniest bit amount of muscle mass, and they have to program, they have to have much better structured programming in order to get stronger. That's the thing. Beginners, like I mentioned in my previous video over diminished returns, they can kind of do anything. It doesn't mean that they should just do anything, but they kind of do anything and get good results. But advanced lifters and even intermediate lifters to a degree have to train smart in order to keep seeing results, to keep getting progression. Now, those are pretty much the fundamental differences, guys. It's all about rate of progression. That's what's really going to determine, if someone's beginner, intermediate, or advanced. Now, the reason this is important, guys, is because, it's really easy. You don't want a beginner on an advanced level program, right? Like I said, an advanced level lifter has to, work out a certain type of way, has to have a certain amount of volume, intensity, periodization in order to see any type of results. Well, when you get that technical or you throw that much workload at a beginner, they're more than likely going to get burnt out, or they may even get injured because they don't know their bodies well enough that specifically to know what works for them and what doesn't. At the same time, you can't have an advanced level lifter on a beginner level program because he's not going to get any results from it, in the sense of he can't just do the bare minimum and expect to make these crazy gains at the way that a beginner level lifter does. It just doesn't work that way. For example, guys, me, not even being advanced, but being intermediate, if I want to see any type of significant growth in my biceps, for example, because my biceps are fairly well developed at this point, I'm probably going to have to, hit some isolation movements. I probably have to throw in some curls or throw in a little bit more volume, making sure that I'm, on top of my, compound movements, my rows and pulls, throwing in a little bit more volume with some isolation bicep movements. Whereas a beginner, guys, it doesn't matter. There's fundamentally no difference when you take two beginners, the one who does curls and the one who doesn't, assuming they're hitting the same compounds as far as their rows and pulls, they're both going to get significant bicep growth. The one who does curls may get a little bit more, but it's not going to be a very noticeable difference because their bodies can just quickly adapt to that stimulus. Whereas for intermediate advanced lifters, it's different. They have to be very smart with how they train based upon their goals. So that's kind of the idea behind why you want to know if you're beginner, intermediate, or advanced, just so you can know the best way to train. The way that beginners should be training is establishing a good base of strength. You want to be focusing on getting stronger. Yes, you can build, you're building muscle mass with that, but you have to understand the correlation and connection between your strength and muscle mass is so strong, especially with beginner level lifters. If you are gradually going in there, you're building up your reps, you're pushing more weight, you're getting stronger, I guarantee you that you are building muscle as a beginner. Even if you're not in caloric surplus, because like I said, beginners can body recomposition where they're burning fat and building muscle at the same time just because their bodies have to adapt to that stimulus. Now, when you're intermediate, that's when it starts changing. You have to be a little bit more focused on what your goals are. If you really want to focus more on building muscle mass, then you need to train more specifically for that. If you want to focus more specifically on just getting stronger, you train more for that. Not that you don't have to focus on progressive overload regardless, but people who are more focused on muscle mass tend to train in the higher rep range. People who are more focused on strength, power, and explosiveness tend to train in the lower rep range. So things like that. And then of course the advanced level lifters, like I said, they know their body down perfectly. I'm talking, these are people who've been training 10, 15 years. They know what works for them, what doesn't, and they have to put in, like I said, all that time just to get a little bit of results. And then, of course, there's the quote-unquote elite level lifter, which I didn't really cover just because there's really not that many of them, but these are people where they take multi-year cycles, guys, to make even the smallest bit of progression. These are the people where it doesn't matter what the genetics are like or even how much drugs they're on. It takes such a long time for them to get any type of progression, years. So that's pretty much it, guys. That's how you determine if someone is beginner, intermediate, or advanced. It's not so much based off always how much you're lifting, especially based on your body weight. That doesn't have anything to do with it at all. Absolute strength can be a factor depending on what type of program you're getting on. But once again, the absolute strength of somebody who's 100 pounds is never going to be as much as somebody who's 200 pounds. It's not to say that the person who weighs less is always going to be in the beginner, intermediate stage. They can both be advanced. It's all about where did you start and where you at now in terms of your lifts, right? That's when you look at absolute strength in that way. But at the end of the day, it's all about the rate of progression, how the body adapts, what type of stimulus it adapts to, how much volume and frequency that somebody can handle. That's the thing. Intermediate advanced lifters tend to get a lot more benefit from more volume than beginner level lifters. Now, all lifters need to focus on frequency regardless. Like we said, hitting a muscle group 2 to 3 times a week is always going to be more optimal than just hitting it once a week. But the fact is, intermediate advanced level lifters will get more benefit from that volume because they'll need that extra bit of volume to stimulate more growth and to get stronger. Whereas beginner level lifters, like I said, you can just come in 3 times a week, full body, high frequency, and they're going to make all kinds of fantastic gains. So that's it for the video, guys. I hope it was simple. I hope I broke it down for you guys well enough. I'm sorry if it's a little bit longer than what I expected it to be, but if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and leave a comment down below. Let me know that you did. If you didn't enjoy the video, that's okay. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what I can do to get better. Like the video, share, subscribe. Keep it simple, specific, scientific. I'll catch y'all later.
I am the greatest.
Come on,